Late fall puts a certain varnish on small towns. Everything looks neat from a distance: trimmed hedges, swept sidewalks, storefront signs sun-faded to pastels, the diner windows glowing before dawn like they've been doing it forever. The place I was sent to was a mill town that had learned to look maintained even while it aged. The only thing that felt out of place was the siren on the fire station roof, an old civil defense-style horn, too serious for a town this quiet. I was in my mid-30s, the kind of person who trusts receipts and timestamps more than instinct. I was there for a week of routine field work, verification photos, utility access points, boundary documentation. I keep logs because it keeps me honest. I don't romanticize places. A siren is a siren. A job is a job. My assignment was simple on paper: scattered addresses across town and the rural edge, 2 meters out on county roads, a municipal outbuilding near the tree line, and a final access point behind an old factory property. I stayed at a basic roadside motel that smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet glue. Every day I ate the same predictable meals, planned the route to finish before dark, and backed up photos to a folder labeled by date. People mentioned the siren the way they mentioned weather. Something about a test schedule. Something about volunteer fire calls. A leftover from older emergency planning. Nobody seemed bothered by it, which should have been reassuring. What I noticed, though, was the absence of anything official. No sign, no flyer, no bulletin board notice at the motel desk. Yet everyone spoke as if the time was common knowledge. As if the town had an agreement it didn't need to write down. The first time it sounded, it was late evening, well after the diner closed and the road noise thinned out. I was at the motel desk, checking tomorrow's addresses against the map on my phone, when the siren hit the air. It wasn't distant. It had that mechanical, chest-gripping pitch that carries through walls and makes your teeth feel slightly wrong. I waited for the usual follow-through. Engines, lights, doors opening, someone stepping outside to look around. Nothing happened. No rush of boots on the motel walkway. No distant wail of trucks. The siren cut off too fast, mid-cry, as if someone had flipped a switch. I wrote the time down without thinking. Habit. I told myself it was a malfunction, an accidental trigger, a power blip. What bothered me was what came after, how dead the town sounded. No unsettling. No late traffic. The silence felt deliberate. Over the next 2 days, the siren repeated at times that made no sense together. Once in the early morning darkness when the diner was just opening. Once mid-afternoon when the sun was low but still up. Once near midnight when even the highway sounded far away. Each time the reaction was wrong. Not panic, just nothing. I watched people from my truck at a stop sign after the afternoon one. A couple on the sidewalk stiffened for a moment, shoulders tight, then kept walking like they'd heard a phone buzz. At the diner, the cook didn't look up. The waitress didn't pause. It wasn't that they were used to it. It was more like they'd been trained to treat it as background. My route started intersecting with closed spaces that didn't match the paperwork. Chain-link lots with fresh padlocks on gates that looked recently repainted. A trailhead posted with new warning signs, the corners crisp and unweathered. A municipal road that appeared open, except a clean barricade had been moved just enough for a truck to slip through without taking it down. I told myself small towns do things their own way. Volunteer crews, informal maintenance, coincidence. Still, I started cross-checking times. I marked where I was when the siren sounded. I took extra photos of posted notices for records. My log got more precise than it needed to be, which is what I do when something starts nagging at the edge of logic. Then there were the vehicles. A dark SUV I noticed twice from a distance. A work truck with no company markings parked in different places on different days. Nothing overt. No one approached me. But the feeling of being in the same frame as someone else, unasked, kept repeating. By the third day, I had enough notes to see something I didn't want to name. The siren wasn't random. It sounded when I was near specific locations. The old factory boundary, the creek bridge where the county road narrowed, the municipal outbuilding at the edge of town. Once, it hit right as I turned onto a road leading into a residential pocket with too many NO outlet signs for how many mailboxes were there. It wasn't fear, not at first. It was the measured discomfort of realizing a pattern is forming around you without your consent. Like finding your own schedule written in someone else's handwriting. I considered calling the non-emergency number. I pictured explaining it. The siren times, the lack of response, the vehicles that seemed to repeat. It sounded flimsy even inside my own head. I didn't want to waste time, or worse, draw attention by asking questions. So I did what I always do. I doubled down on procedure. Doors locked. Car fueled. Notes clean. Finish the assignment. Leave at first light. Keep it boring. Keep it normal. I told myself that if I acted like nothing was happening, then nothing could happen. Near the end of the week, I had one last verification. A utility access point behind the old factory property. Legal access was supposed to be through a gravel service road off a county lane. It was still light when I arrived, but the light had thinned, late fall light that feels tired before the day is done. The place felt wrong in a practical way. Too maintained for abandoned land. Tire tracks too fresh in gravel that should have been settled. The gate was closed, not chained like it had been ignored, but closed like it was being used. My paperwork showed permitted access, but I wasn't about to force anything. I parked outside the gate and walked along the fence line to get the required photos through the mesh and around the angles. That's when the siren came on, full volume, sustained. Not a short burst. Not a stutter. A long, steady wail that vibrated in my ribs. The environment reacted, but not like an emergency. Somewhere behind the factory shell, a floodlight snapped on, bright enough to bleach the weeds and cast hard shadows. In the distance, engines started. I heard doors shut, more than one. Through gaps in the ruined windows, I saw movement that was too coordinated to be casual. Silhouettes spacing out along the far end of the lot, staying behind structures, not rushing, not panicking. It did something to my thinking. It made the situation snap into adult math. Isolated property, fading light, unknown people moving with purpose, and a siren that did not match any normal call pattern. I stopped trying to finish properly. My goal changed from completing paperwork to getting back to the car without giving anyone a reason to close distance. I didn't run. Running makes you loud. I walked fast, controlled, eyes moving, phone in hand with the screen awake. I kept breathing steady because panic makes you stupid. As I reached the car, a vehicle rolled onto the county lane from the bend. Headlights off until the last second, like it wanted to be invisible until it didn't. It slowed, not to help, not to ask questions, but to match my pace. At the same time, near the gate, a shape appeared where there hadn't been one, a person or two, positioning themselves as if they'd expected me to park inside and needed an excuse to block the exit. I got the door shut, locked it, and pulled away clean. No tire squeal, no hesitation. The siren cut off abruptly again, mid-wail, like a command ending. The sudden quiet made my ears ring. I drove straight to the brightest public place I could reach. A lit gas station on the highway, cameras overhead, other cars coming and going. My hands weren't shaking much, but my grip on the wheel was too tight, and my mind kept trying to invent normal explanations that wouldn't hold. At the gas station, I did practical things because practical things keep you anchored. I walked a slow circle around the car. No punctures. No scratches I hadn't noticed before. No fresh marks around the door handle. I checked under the bumper like I'd suddenly become the kind of person who expects devices where there shouldn't be devices. Then I sat where the cameras could see me, bought something small I didn't need, and kept the receipt. A timestamp you can prove is a comfort when your own memory starts trying to negotiate with what happened. I reviewed the photos in my phone. The siren event aligned with the moment I was inside the fence line angle, right down to the minute. That didn't make it illegal. It made it intentional. I waited long enough to see if the dark vehicle would appear. It didn't, but that absence didn't feel like safety. It felt like restraint, like whoever was moving out there didn't need to follow me into the light. I thought about reporting it again, but what would I say? No srets, no confrontation, no faces, just a siren, lights, and coordinated movement that stopped the moment I left. The safest choice was the oldest one. Leave town in daylight and don't give anyone a reason to remember you twice. Later, back at the motel, I looked through my images more carefully. In one photo, a posted placard was visible on the fence. Clean print, crisp corners, the kind of sign that hadn't been there long. I was almost sure it wasn't there earlier in the week. The language was generic, the sort of thing you could hang anywhere, but it felt newly placed, like it had been added after my routes started repeating. Another detail bothered me more. In a sequence of shots taken minutes apart, tire tracks in the gravel appeared, and then didn't. Not smudged, not covered, just absent in a way that suggested something had moved through and been erased, or that I was being shown what someone wanted me to notice, one moment at a time. I searched for any typical emergency pattern. Nothing. No social media posts about siren tests. No public notice. No scanner chatter I could find from the usual sources. The fire station looked active during the day, trucks in and out, doors open, people moving. But the siren seemed to operate outside normal procedure. On the morning I left, I passed the station on my way out. From a distance I noticed new conduit running up to the siren, clean, recent work. The upgrade didn't match the rest of the town's tired infrastructure, like someone had spent money on the one tool that could speak to everyone at once. I left with my paperwork technically complete and my week accounted for in logs and photos. But something in me didn't file it away cleanly. The siren stopped being a landmark in my memory. It became a symbol, an old mechanism repurposed for a kind of control that doesn't need uniforms. Back home, ordinary sirens sounded different for a while. Less like help arriving, more like instruction being issued. I checked public records later. Nothing matched those times. No reported fires. No storms. No accidents that would justify the pattern. If it was a malfunction, why the floodlight and the coordinated movement? If it was a signal, what was it signaling? And why did it begin only after I arrived? I still don't have an answer I can prove. I only have what I wrote down, what I photographed, and the feeling that, for a few days in that tidy little town, I wasn't just doing a job. I was being guided, or warned. Midwinter makes river towns look like they're holding their breath. During the day, the downtown where I was working could have been printed on a postcard. Antique shops with frosted windows, a little closed cinema with a marquee that hadn't changed in years, and brick sidewalks swept clean even after snow. But after dusk, the place went quiet in a way that didn't feel sleepy. It felt managed. I was in my mid-30s, there for a short contract, property documentation tied to a small telecom cabinet audit, the kind of work where you take clean photos, match serials, close a file, and move on. I'm methodical. I keep checklists and timestamps because mistakes come back as phone calls. The motel was clean but dated, the heat too dry, the carpet worn in the same path from bed to desk. Nights arrived early. Street lights lined the roads in even spacing, old infrastructure maintained like tradition, and in the cold they made a soft electrical hum you could hear if you paid attention. My work that week was spread across 3 neighborhoods, older houses near the river, a newer cul-de-sac with the same model homes repeating, and a half-empty street by an old rail spur where properties had been subdivided and then not quite filled. The addresses were few, but the documentation had to be precise. I'd revisit the same places, confirm changes, compare angles, and make sure the notes matched the photos. I fell into a routine almost immediately. I'd finish paperwork at the motel desk, upload photos, label everything by date and address, then take a short evening walk, a block or two, to the same corner store for water or coffee. It was a habit I've always had after work, just to clear my head. What I noticed, in a quiet way, was how many porch lights stayed on even when driveways were empty, and how many windows had curtains pulled tight despite warm yellow light leaking around the edges. I assumed it was privacy. It looked like people keeping their lives to themselves. In a small town, that's not unusual. It's often the polite thing. The first evening I walked, the cold had that hard, dry bite that makes your nostrils sting. I zipped my coat, hands in pockets, boots squeaking on packed snow. A street light ahead of me went dark as I approached. No flique, no struggling bus. It just shut off, clean, instant, like someone had flipped it. Then the next light went out, a few seconds later, farther down the block. And then another. It wasn't the whole street. It was a narrow corridor of darkness moving forward, paced to my approach, leaving the blocks behind me still lit. I stopped and looked up, the way anyone does when something in the world changes unexpectedly. The lights behind me stayed on, humming. The lights ahead stayed off, silent. I told myself it was a sensor, a timer, temperature-related load, maybe. Even a motion sensor, behaving the opposite of what you'd expect. Systems do weird things in extreme cold. I kept walking. What I couldn't shake was the timing. The lights didn't behave like failures. They behaved like decisions. It happened again the next night, on a different street. I tried to make it make sense by testing it the way I test everything, small, controlled changes. I slowed my pace. The darkness slowed, too, one light at a time turning off in front of me, as if it was keeping distance. I sped up. The wave adjusted, shutting down the next lamp sooner, maintaining the same moving pocket ahead. Nothing behind me went out. It never closed in. It always opened forward, like a path being cleared, not for me to see, but for me to lose sight. By the third evening, I started driving instead of walking. I told myself I was being practical, It was cold, and I was tired, and there was no reason to be stubborn about a walk. But the corridor effect appeared through the windshield too. A streetlight at the end of a block would go dark, then the next, and the next, creating a darker lane down an otherwise normal street while the parallel streets stayed bright. Then it spread to porch lights, only on one block near the edge of downtown. A porch light would click on as I approached, then click off after I passed. Not every house, only certain ones. It looked almost polite at first, like someone checking the street. But the timing was too tight, the sequence too clean. During the day, nothing seemed unusual at the work locations. No broken lamps, no hipercruz. But I began noticing overlap. An address I visited in daylight, just another house near the rail spur, sat in a pocket where the streetlights failed more frequently at night. A cabinet I photographed near the river was on a corner where the wave always seemed to start. Isolation was the worst part, and it came on quietly. No cars rolling past when I expected them. No pedestrians. No dogs barking. The town felt staged, like it could go still on command and hold that stillness until it got what it wanted. I started logging it the way I log everything. Times, streets, weather, my own speed. The notes looked ridiculous on paper, which made me write them more carefully, just to prove to myself I wasn't being dramatic. A pattern emerged the way patterns always do, slowly, and then all at once. The corridor of darkness wasn't just moving ahead. It was guiding. Every time it happened, it nudged me toward the same side of town. The street near the old rail spur, where the houses thinned out and the sidewalks stopped being maintained. It was a street I didn't need to visit for work. My listed addresses were nearby, but not on it. Yet the darkness kept steering me closer, as if the system was trying to lure my route into alignment. I didn't believe in supernatural explanations. I still don't, not as a default. But intent is intent, whether it's electrical or human. And the intent here was obvious. It wanted me on that street. I thought about calling someone local non-emergency, the motel front desk, even a co-worker just to hear a normal voice. But the explanation sounded absurd. Streetlights turning off in sequence? Porch lights clicking like signals? A moving corridor of darkness? So I made a quiet decision that felt childish and adult at the same time. If it happened again, I would not follow it. I would turn around immediately, even if it felt irrational. Especially if it felt irrational, because my body had started reacting before my mind could justify it, and I've learned to respect that gap. One late evening, I drove to the corner store for water. The place was bright and normal inside, fluorescent lighting, a bored clerk, the smell of hot coffee that had been sitting too long. I paid, kept the receipt out of habit, and drove back toward the motel. On the residential street ahead, a light went out. Then the next. Then the next. It wasn't the whole neighborhood. It was a darker lane down that one street, a neat corridor of reduced visibility, while the intersecting roads stayed lit. The effect was subtle enough that if you weren't watching for it, you could miss it and just blame winter darkness. I felt my hands tighten on the wheel. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down. I made the choice I'd promised myself I'd make. At the next turn, I took a longer route, one that would keep me on brighter streets and loop me back to the motel from the other side. The corridor reappeared. A light on my alternate road shut off, then another, as if anticipating the detour. The timing was immediate, too clean for coincidence. I had the sick, practical sensation of being watched by something that didn't need eyes, something that could see my options before I took them. Near the rail spur, I caught movement, not fast, not obvious. A figure standing in the exact gap between two dead streetlights. That's the worst place for your eyes, the space where shadows pool and your depth perception starts guessing. The figure wasn't walking. It wasn't waving. It was positioned. Too centered. Too still. I kept driving at a steady speed, doors locked. As I drew closer, porch lights on that block clicked on in sequence. One, then the next, then another, like a ripple of illumination passing along the houses. It lit empty yards, clean snowbanks, a couple of parked cars. It did not light the figure. The figure remained in the dark band, as if the light was being managed around it, preserving that gap. Then something appeared in the road ahead, low and pale. At first it looked like a bag, maybe trash blown into the street. Then it looked like bundled cloth. It didn't move the way wind-blown things move. It sat where it was placed. I braked hard, but I didn't stop fully. It wasn't bravery. It was calculation. A full stop is a commitment. A full stop is a surrender of momentum. In my headlights, the object looked arranged, not fallen. And as my speed dropped, I saw a second silhouette shift near the mouth of a driveway. Just a change in posture, a step, a weight transfer, like someone waiting for the exact moment a driver decides to get out and move something. My stomach went cold in a way the winter air couldn't compete with. I swerved just enough to avoid the object and kept going. I didn't look back to see if it moved. I didn't turn my head to confirm the figure. I focused on the road, on keeping control, and on reaching the highway where the lights were brighter and there were other cars. I drove straight out of town like someone leaving a building with a fire alarm, calm enough to avoid attention, fast enough to be gone. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station under harsh white lighting that made everything look honest. I parked within view of the doors and the cameras, engine still running for a moment until my breathing settled. My hands shook from adrenaline, not terror, my body catching up to decisions my mind had already made. I stepped out and checked under the car. Nothing hanging, nothing wedged, no obvious damage. I took a photo of the odometer and another of the receipt with the time printed on it, like I could anchor the night to proof. Back in the car, I pulled up the dashcam footage. The streetlights didn't fail like old bulbs failing. They cut out with perfect timing. The porch light sequence was there too, visible in the corner of the frame. On, then staying lit while the figure remained unlit. I debated reporting it. I imagined the conversation. Yes, I know how it sounds. No, I didn't stop. No, I don't have a clear face. Streetlights turned off in sequence. Porch lights behaved like signals. Instead of calling, I changed behavior. No more walking. No more late errands. Finish work early. Leave town immediately after the final documentation. I didn't need a name for what it was to know I didn't want to be part of it again. In daylight, the rail spur street looked normal. The lamps weren't broken. The poles weren't damaged. There were no repair trucks, no crews, no caution tape. The neighborhood even looked cared for in its own way. Snow shoveled. Steps cleared. Nothing visibly wrong. But I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. Every house on that block had unusually new fixtures on older porches. Bright, modern housings on weathered wood. Matching styles, like they'd been installed around the same time. Not just one or two, nearly all of them. At a diner the next morning, I overheard enough to learn the town had replaced its streetlight control system recently. Quietly, without much public mention, like it was just another maintenance item. Nobody talked about it like news. Nobody joked about it. It was treated like something you don't invite questions about. Back home, I watched the footage again, frame by frame. That's when I noticed the part I'd avoided thinking about. The figure never reflected my headlights the way fabric should. Even dark clothing catches something, edge highlights, a faint sheen, a change when the angle shifts. This didn't. It was more like a cutout of darkness. Not just in shadow, but consistently darker than the surrounding night, like the camera couldn't resolve it because there was nothing to resolve, just absence shaped like a person. I don't claim to know what it was. I only know what it did. It tried to control where I stopped. That's the part that stays with me, practical and ugly. Someone, or something, had the ability to shape visibility on a public street. And the town behaved like that was normal, like darkness was part of the infrastructure, managed as quietly as snow removal. Months later, I still watch streetlights when I drive at night. When one goes out ahead of me, I don't tell myself it's nothing. I don't debate. I change routes without hesitation. Because I learned, in a town that looked postcard pretty by day, that darkness can be organized. And when it's organized, it isn't there by accident. Early spring is when small towns start advertising themselves again. The county seat I was working out of had a courthouse square with tidy shrubs, a public library with big windows, and that particular civic pride that shows up as paper. Flyers pinned straight, corners taped down clean, staples aligned like it mattered. Bake sales, lost pets, church suppers, a retirement party for someone I didn't know, announced in 3 different fonts. I was in my early to mid-30s, detail-oriented by temperament and by trade. I was there temporarily for work, documenting storm damage tied to an insurance dispute, the kind of assignment where the truth lives in photos, measurements, and old records. I like orderly places, predictable routines, familiar civic spaces where you can sit down, get stable Wi-Fi, print forms, and keep the day from turning into a guess. The library became that anchor for me. I'd do field work, then stop in to scan documents and upload files before heading back to my motel. The job needed permits, map prints, and local records, plat books, older photos, anything that could support a timeline. The library had what I needed, a quiet printer, a scanner that didn't choke on PDFs, and staff who knew where things were without acting like gatekeepers. I started going daily without thinking about it. Same parking spot if it was open. Same table near an outlet. Same routine, scan, upload, print a checklist for the next day. On my first afternoon there, I noticed a missing person flyer on the community board. It stood out because it was crisp, cleanly designed, freshly printed, not sun-faded like the rest. The face on it was ordinary, mid-30s, neutral expression, the kind of headshot you could imagine from a workplace ID badge. Nothing dramatic. No tears. No bold red urgent. Just calm information and a few tear-off tabs that hung straight. The date on it was recent, almost too recent, like it had been put up that morning. What I found odd, even then, was that none of the tear-offs were missing. People walked by it, read it, and kept going with the same posture they used for bake sale announcements. 2 days later, the flyer was still there, but it wasn't the same one. The layout was identical. Same fonts, same spacing, same little county seal watermark that looked like someone knew how to use a template. But the name had changed slightly, one letter swapped, like an edit made too quickly. The photo was different too, yet it gave the same impression, mid-30s, neutral, not quite smiling. It felt less like a specific person, and more like the town was printing the idea of a person. I told myself there could be multiple missing cases, or a volunteer group standardizing flyers. It wasn't my business, and my job already had enough moving parts. Then I read the description. One line repeated exactly, including a typo that didn't belong in a serious notice. The wording was strange, too flat and procedural, like it had been copied without anyone thinking about what it meant. It wasn't the kind of mistake you expect when someone's genuinely desperate. I took a photo of it out of habit, the same way I photograph posted notices at work sites. Proof, not curiosity. Still, I remember putting my phone down and feeling a mild discomfort I couldn't justify. By the next day, I started seeing the flyer everywhere. At the grocery store, taped to the vestibule glass where carts bumped it and still didn't crumple. At the laundromat, pinned above the change machine. At the diner, near the door where local ads and high school fundraisers fought for space. It was always crisp, always the newest paper in the room, always pinned straight, like it had been placed by someone who took pride in the act. The last seen locations on the flyer caught my attention because they overlapped with places I had on my own work list. A pull-off near the river, an access road by the landfill, a gravel lot behind the old high school. None of them were obviously dangerous. They were just blank spaces, places where you could be unseen for a minute if everyone else agreed not to look. I did what any practical person does when something seems off. I tried to confirm it with a normal source. I checked local news sites. I searched the sheriff's page. I looked for public alerts, press releases, anything, because missing person notices in a town this organized should have a corresponding trail online. There was nothing. No posts. No updates. No name matching the flyers. It was like the notices existed in a parallel system that didn't touch the internet. I asked indirect questions the way you do when you don't want to sound like an outsider hunting for a story. At the diner, I mentioned the flyer in a casual tone. The response slid into generalities. People go missing sometimes. You never know, folks should be careful. At the library, I asked if there was an online notice I could link for a friend. The staff member smiled politely and said they didn't handle that, and then asked if I needed more paper for the printer. Courteous. Evasive. Not defensive, worse than that. Smooth. So I started photographing each version whenever I saw it. Library board. Grocery store. Laundromat. I compared them like a work problem. The faces changed, but the flyer stayed the same. After a few days, the missing person started to feel familiar in a way that made my skin tighten. Not because I'd seen them around town. I hadn't. It was more subtle than that. The features began drifting toward mine. Same kind of hairline, same general build listed in the description. A clothing style that matched what someone like me would wear for field work. Each new version looked a little closer, as if someone was adjusting a slider. I told myself it was pattern seeking. Stress. My brain trying to stitch meaning into repeated images. But the pressure in my chest didn't care about my explanations. It arrived as soon as my eyes touched the paper. That's when I decided to test reality the way I test anything uncertain. Change inputs, document outputs. I stopped visiting the library for a couple days. I avoided bulletin boards. I changed my routine. Different diner, different gas station, different route back to the motel. I kept receipts. I took normal photos of ordinary things, my coffee cup, my mileage, the motel key card. Not because I was building a case. Because part of me wanted proof that my life was still under my own management. On my final work day, I had a deadline-driven task I couldn't push. I needed to photograph a municipal drainage easement near the river at dusk, when shadows made the erosion line clearer in the images. It was a practical choice, not a dramatic one. I'd done things like that 100 times. The location matched the last seen line from one of the flyers. I parked near a trail entrance where a wooden post held the usual signs: hours, leash rules, a faded map. And there, stapled to the post as if it belonged, was a new bulletin. Same template, fresh paper. Date stamped that morning. The face was now uncomfortably close to mine. Close enough that the differences felt like an insult. My mouth went dry in that plain, physical way the body does before the mind decides what it believes. I stayed in open sight lines. I took the required photos quickly, wide shot, mid shot, close detail with the measuring stick. I kept my back from turning fully to the trees. I could hear the river, high and cold, moving over rocks with that constant sound that makes it hard to tell if anything else is moving. That's when I noticed small strips of paper on low branches. White rectangles fluttering slightly. At first I thought it was litter. Then I realized what they were: torn flyer tabs, the little tear-off contact strips, placed like breadcrumbs leading off the official path toward the riverbank. I didn't follow them. I didn't even step closer to confirm. The idea of them was enough. And then I heard movement in the leaves in the direction of the paper trail. Not a crash, not a sprint. Just the steady sound of someone walking in a way that matched my distance, staying parallel, keeping pace. I turned back toward the parking area with the controlled speed of someone refusing to create a scene. Halfway there, I saw another flyer stapled to a different post near the lot entrance. It hadn't been there minutes earlier. The description line had changed. It now included a clothing detail that I was wearing at that moment, specific enough that it wasn't a guess. The kind of detail you only get by seeing someone up close. I didn't run. Running makes you sloppy. I walked quickly to the car, got in, locked the doors, and started the engine with hands that felt slightly numb. As I drove away, I passed the courthouse board on the square. Under the streetlights, I saw 2 volunteers in reflective vests calmly pinning new copies of the flyer, smoothing the paper flat with gloved hands. They moved with the practiced rhythm of scheduled maintenance. They didn't look up at my car. They didn't need to. I went straight to a well-lit gas station on the edge of town and parked under the brightest canopy light like it was shelter. I sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, breathing evenly, waiting for my thoughts to line up behind the facts. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, as if I expected my face to have changed. I checked my clothes, my jacket, my pockets. Nothing was missing. Nothing was added. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. What I had, what was real, were photos. Multiple flyer versions. Dates visible. The same template repeating like a form letter. The same typo line always copied. Evidence that didn't depend on my feelings. I considered contacting authorities, but the crime was unclear. Printing flyers isn't illegal. Posting them isn't illegal. The danger was implied, not explicit, and implied danger is hard to explain without sounding like you're asking to be dismissed. So I did the most practical thing available. I finished the administrative closeout remotely from the motel, backed everything up twice, and left town that night instead of the next morning. I didn't want another sunrise there. I wanted distance. Back home, I reviewed the flyer photos on a bigger screen. That's when the details got worse instead of better. The paper stock looked identical across every location, same brightness, same slight texture. The printer marks were identical too, a faint banding on the grayscale areas, a tiny smear near the lower corner. It wasn't a lot of people printing the same template. It was one machine producing them all consistently and distributing them across town like mail. Then I noticed something in the photo metadata. Around the river location, there were odd gaps in timestamps, minutes missing without corresponding camera movement. The sequence jumped as if my phone clock stuttered. I wasn't taking video. I wasn't losing signal. I was standing in an open area taking still photos. Yet the time record had holes in it, clean and unexplained. Weeks later, a letter arrived at my home address with no return name. Plain envelope, typed address, no postage mark that made sense to me. Inside was a single, clean missing person flyer. The face was blanked out by overexposure, just a white oval where features should have been. But the description below it matched me precisely. Height, build, hair, clothing tendencies. Even the repeating line with the typo was there, like a signature. The tear-off tabs were intact. I never learned who prints the flyers or why the town participates. It could be a predatory network with a tidy presentation. It could be some bureaucratic ritual that got repurposed when someone realized paper is easier than questions. Or it could be something stranger, an old community habit that modernized when the library got a better printer. What stays with me isn't panic. It's organization. The way it felt like maintenance, not crisis. Like the town had decided, quietly and together, that missing people are part of the calendar. I don't avoid bulletin boards because of superstition. I avoid them because I learned something practical. A town can decide someone is missing before they ever disappear. And if a place can do that calmly, neatly in public, then the scariest part isn't what happens in the dark. It's what gets posted in the light.